Well, hi everyone. I first want to say that it's like for me being here in the middle of summer, and it's a crazy trip to come from Vermont and feel this heat. But it's great, and I hope to bring some of that back up to Vermont. I think we'll probably have another blizzard in our future before we can start thinking about plants at all, but it's really great to be here. It's been a long time since I've been in Florida, and how amazing is it to be in Florida with a group of plant people whom I've been getting to know a little bit in the last couple of days since I've been here. This morning I went out just as the sun was coming up, and I was hoping to see a crescent moon. Annie and I went out the day before, and there's this little crescent, because of course, you know, the moon and the sun are about to conjoin in an eclipse tomorrow, which is also pretty incredible to be here with you guys on the day of an eclipse. But the stars were still out, and it was clear. And as I'm running and moving down the road, there's this mist kind of rising up out of the lagoons, and I'm going for my run, and I'm listening to birdsong and watching the stars fade from the sky, and then I come back and I'm welcomed by live oaks hanging in moss, and this environment that I'm just not used to, but is so incredible and ancient and powerful, and I'm welcomed by song and sacred smoke, and there's cedar on the prayer mound, and it's just this incredible, overwhelming place. And that's kind of what I want to talk about this evening, because what we feel in these moments when we're overwhelmed and overpowered by love and connection, I think that's really what it's all about. And I'll tell you, had I not found plants when I was 15, 16, 17, and I was sitting in a tree, and the tree told me, like, you know, if you don't want to keep going to college, that's okay. There are other people who know about plants, and you can go find them. And I was like, really? What will my family think? And they're like, they will understand in time. And indeed they did. But those experiences, I think, are what drive us all and what keep us coming back. And for me, being connected to plants is the true way to that. At least that's what's worked for me. And you all know that herbal medicine is kind of different from almost anything else that goes on in this culture, in this country. It really is different. I've been trying to figure out what exactly is different about it. I mean, we know it all instinctively and intuitively, but what is it if we try and put a finger on it? I've really been trying to articulate it, because I think it's important for us to be able to convey what that difference is in really clear terms. I think there's a secret inside herbal medicine. And it's not just a secret that helps heal people. It's a secret that helps heal families and communities and culture. And that's what I want to talk about tonight, is maybe trying to distill some of the things that we all share, some of the experiences we've all had, how we can move out back into our world after this evening, after tomorrow, when we get back into our cars and drive back home or fly back home or make our way back to the people we love who aren't with us tonight. What is it that we can distill? You know, some of you know that I'm super into pharmacology and botanical constituents. And it's not because of the science of it. It's because it's actually really beautiful. And one of the first times that this difference was really articulated clearly to me was when I was researching bioflavonoids. Bioflavonoids are this class of botanical molecules that are part of what we call the polyphenol family, and they're found in a lot of different berries, you know, from hawthorn berries to blueberries and onward, but also in a range of other plants. They're part of the green world pretty ubiquitously. And I'm researching about bioflavonoids, and you know, a lot of attention has been given to them as antioxidants. And I want to push back against that idea, because we're not here to like fight free radicals. You know, that's the kind of, I would say, European gun mentality that we bring to medicine, that there's this enemy that we have to fight, and these constituents from plants are doing that. But no, that's not exactly what's going on at all with bioflavonoids. What they're doing is interfacing with this crazy dance of proteins and DNA and enzymes that affect the expression of our DNA, and moment to moment, they're changing the way our genes become our physical body. So this is very, very deep, right? Being able to affect genetic expression by what's called modification of epigenetic factors is one of the deepest ways that you can affect the physical being of a human. And that's exactly what plants are doing. And when I found this out of bioflavonoids, I was like, wow, they're changing gene expression. That's why inflammation goes down, is because they're shutting off those inflammation genes. It's almost like This is tangible evidence that plants care for us. They're in there affecting the expression of our reality on a moment-to-moment basis. And of course they do care for us, and we all know this. But these constituents are tangible evidence of this. And of course there's bitters too, there's these bitter plants and some of the bitter principles that we consume, and without them, we have a hard time regulating our carbohydrate consumption. We don't eat properly unless we consume bitter plants. Without bitter plants, we develop gas and bloating and heartburn and all this other crazy stuff that really isn't normal, despite what the FDA might tell you. And so again, whether it's bioflavonoids, whether it's bitter principles and the way they affect our digestion and our liver metabolism and the way we can handle the toxicity of today's world, there's evidence over and over again that plants are enmeshed in our deepest physiologic processes. Modern medicine doesn't understand this. Modern medicine has no approved drugs that interface with gene expression yet. They're working on it now that they've discovered it's a thing, but plants have been doing it since before we were human. And they do it in an incredible, very deep way. So that's the first thing that kind of got me to thinking, wow, these plants truly have the ability to connect with us in a way that is very, very deep. But the practical piece of it is what brings me back every day. I'm fascinated by phytochemistry, of course, but the things that we do in our kitchens and in our communities and in our clinics every day, those are the experiences that I think we all share, right? How many of you have had an experience when you're brewing a cup of tea and giving it to someone where you've really felt that that tea carried something special or something magical for the person that you gave it to? How many of you have been blending tinctures together and all of a sudden you taste this formula and are like, holy cow, I never would have imagined that these things would have worked together in this perfect, incredible way. It's like I've discovered a new flavor that never existed. How many of you have gone and taken last year's lemon balm out of the jar in the middle of February in Vermont and smelled the brightness of last year's summer and had it bring joy to your heart? I mean, these are all things that we have at least in one measure or another experienced, right? These practical things that we do every day that bring us back to plant medicine. When we walk through a grove that we know and it speaks to us because we've been there so many times and it connects with us in a way that nothing else from the internet or from television or from media could ever do, that's what I'm talking about. So I want to share a brief story with you of an experience that I had that sticks with me and that I think about a lot. So I was wild harvesting one day, and I'm traipsing up and down over hills and crossing ridge lines, and I come to this swamp, and I cross through the swamp, and I'm looking for medicinal mushrooms. That's my sort of goal for the day. I need a bunch of different mushrooms, and I'd found some turkey tails, but I was really holding out for some other stuff. And so this stream drains the swamp, and I'm starting to follow the stream down. It's just a little trickle, draining this wetland. And I'm walking down towards the valley floor, and all of a sudden across the stream is this hemlock log that's fallen across the trail. And I, gently walk over it, and right there as I'm crossing the hemlock log, I look down and there's this bank of reishi mushrooms. I'm like, yes, the reishi mushrooms, and they're perfect, and they're glossy red, and that's exactly what I came for. So I'm turning around and I take out my knife, but we're trained that before we disrupt a plant or disrupt a mushroom, we take a second, right? And we say, hey, how's it going? I'm here. I'm going to make some good medicine. May it serve the people who need it in the best possible way. We do this kind of thing as herbalists. It's part of our collective experience and our collective culture. And as I'm doing this and pausing with my knife in my hand, I get this thought. I'm feeling really good, right? I found my reishi. I'm happy. I get this thought, and it simply says, turn around. And I'm confused for a second because, am I supposed to go home? Like, have I done something wrong? Am I not supposed to have this reishi? It's super perfect, and if I wait a week, it's going to rot. So I'm sitting there now, kind of a little confused, and the feeling I had in my heart, my brain was confused, but the feeling I had in my heart was the feeling that you have right before you give someone a present. You know what that feels like? It's like, I have a surprise for you. It's a good feeling, right? So I was kind of like just in a moment of confusion, and I fortunately lost my rational mind, and I just turned around. And there, not 20 feet away from me, was this white-tailed doe that had stalked me, I guess, and like snuck up on me while I was sitting there talking to the reishi. And I don't know how long, we locked eyes and just stood there in the forest, but it felt like a really long time. And then she just kind of trotted away. And I turned around and I, harvested my mushrooms and put them in my backpack and just walked back home. I felt incredible. My heart was so full. I mean, it kind of almost feels that way now as I'm retelling the story to you. And now every time I give reishi to one of my clients in clinic, that moment is there with me. Have any of you experienced that? It's like you've been in your garden and something magical has happened. You've walked through the woods and this crazy synchronicity has occurred. And you bring those things to your family, you bring those things back to your homes and to your gardens and to your clinics. And this is how we build alignments, right? This is how we build relationship. This is how we build power. It's incredibly powerful stuff. I'm so glad I just shut up the rational mind for a second that was all confused and just turned around and listened to what I was told. So I want to know how we can tap into that all the time and how we can help others tap into that who maybe haven't experienced plant magic. How can we define this experience and bring it to others in a powerful and meaningful way? First of all, I think we have to understand that herbal medicine talks about life and talks about what we do in a way that is, again, really different from the way modern medicine talks about health and disease, for example. We talk about systems. We talk about processes. So for me, giving reishi to a client is more than just, dispensing a medicine. It's my life with the mushroom. It's my time in the forest. And it's that experience and the process of living it. And so the process and the set of relationships that we bring to that process is part of what makes herbal medicine unique and makes it really different from other disciplines of healing. But another story that I want to relate to you is, it comes from this scientist. His name is Daniel Sarowitz, and his field is particularly related to public policy. So what he really is keen on doing is helping to figure out how scientists can communicate with everybody and let them know that things like climate change and human-made climate change are real, and why we should connect to the science about that and why it makes a difference. So what was interesting is that he went, back in 2012, he went to Cambodia and he visited this incredible lost city called Angkor Wat, which some of you may have heard of. So this is this series of temples that have been lost in the jungle for hundreds of years, and now archaeologists have discovered it and they're starting to pull back the vines, right? And they discover this architecture that has patterns in it and has symbols and relationships in the structure of the architecture that mirror all of the patterns in the microcosm and the macrocosm. It has very incredible, powerful architectural motifs and art motifs that were really designed to inspire and connect people to the divine. That's why we think these temples were in the jungle of Cambodia at the time. And it's one of the largest and most complex sort of architectural systems that I think we've discovered from the ancient past. And so Dr. Sarowitz went and visited this place, and he came back and he was so moved by it that he wrote an opinion piece for the journal Nature. I don't know how many of you know the journal Nature, but it's a pretty straight-on science kind of journal, and Daniel Sarowitz is a straight-on science kind of guy. And the article that he wrote for Nature said things like, the art of Angkor Wat elicits these feelings that help me understand and gain a sense of meaning in a way that sometimes science can't do. Pretty incredible. And he said there may be a role in it for art to help to communicate the importance of what we're trying to do as scientists. And of course, as an herbalist, I'm like, yes, that's exactly what we do, right? We try and use art and story to help convey the importance and the meaning of what it is that we do, what it is that we're trying to do to heal folks and to help people get into places that are more comfortable in their life. So it was really an incredible article. I was so heartened to read it. I just want to read you one of the final quotes from it. He says, Angkor demonstrates how to achieve an authentic, personal encounter with the unknown. And when I'm sitting there and I turn around and there's a white-tailed doe staring back at me, that's just mysterious. And for me, the experience and the energy that's contained in that is some of the seeds of the most important power that I think human beings can tap into. And I don't know whether that was the first time Dr. Sarowitz had experienced that, but regardless, it was powerful enough for him to go back and write this opinion piece for Nature. And then I do what you should never do, which is to scroll down and read the comments section. Don't do it. In the comments section, Dr. Sarowitz was excoriated. People said that he's obviously not a scientist. People said that what he said was dangerous and misleading. And those were some of the nicer comments. Whenever anyone made a comment that said, like, well, I don't know, is he onto something? Like, can we try and understand what he's trying to express here? They were roundly shut down by a chorus of 10 people that just completely destroyed the conversation. And that was a roller coaster ride for me, you know? I just read this incredible article that was hopeful and that made connections and that inspired me. And it was so thoughtful and so inclusive. And then I get to this comment section, and the comment section was the exact opposite. It was divisive and, frankly, really rude. And this is a pattern that, unfortunately, I think we don't only see in that particular example, but we see in mainstream culture more and more over the last few years. There's a lot of people who want to say that we are in danger from others, and that these others will hurt us, hurt the people we love, take things from us, damage what we hold dear. And this pattern is a very dark pattern, I think. And it's a pattern, unfortunately, that I don't just see in the culture at large, but it's sometimes patterns that you see in clinic, in people. These things are, I would say, what we would call disease. It's almost like a dark cloak or jacket that you put over yourself, right? Because you're scared. When you experience fear, what do you want to do? You want to insulate yourself and you want to hide. And I'm seeing this happen more and more. And I'm seeing people who maybe really crave the experience of the unknown, and they don't understand how to get to it. And they're reading this article by this supposed scientist or person that they respect, and this person that they respect has tapped into it, and they haven't, and they don't know how to get there. So the thing that they decide to do is tell him that he's wrong, and he's bad, and he's evil, and they don't want to be with him. And this makes me really sad, because it shows this deep longing that these people have for true meaning and connection with the mysterious and with the unknown, with the things that we as herbalists almost take for granted, right? That we get to experience almost every day. Well, I'm going to talk about this a little more, and this is not really why I'm here, but sometimes I really think that my job is to dance with darkness. And I don't know how many of you have experienced this, but when you're in clinic and you're working with patterns of imbalance, these things we call diseases, they're like these dark cloaks that people wrap themselves with sometimes. It's everything from, you know, holding a grudge, unexpressed resentment, onward to things like insulin resistance. That's a pattern that develops. It's a darkness that develops. Things like depression, things like kidney failure. These patterns, right, what we would call dark patterns, things that, you know, insulate and wrap people, especially when we're talking about spiritual health and mental health, they're like these dark cloaks. They insulate the individual from the connection that we experience, you know, when we're walking around the sacred fire or walking under the live oaks. And it's a natural reaction, but it's not a reaction that is life-affirming. And that's really the distinction I want to make, right? Herbalists are about affirming life. At least that's what I think. Our discipline, unlike conventional medicine, really is about building life and affirming life. But in clinic, I have to know what darkness looks like. I have to know when someone's about to reach for the hook to grab that cloak and put it on themselves so I can convince them not to do that. I have to know when people are like fully bundled up in that, what their cloak looks like, so I can find the way to maybe open it a little bit and let a little light in and see if we can change it to a life-affirming pattern. Because what happens, you know, as any herbalist will tell you, or any biology student, if you have a living system and you insulate and isolate it, chances are that its vitality will continue to decrease and will continue to decrease. So I don't mean to, you know, set a bad mood or a negative mood here, but I do think it's important for us to recognize that darkness does exist, and as herbalists, it's part of our responsibility to be able to identify it and get to know it, sometimes a little intimately. It doesn't mean that that's all we can do. Certainly we need to know light as well. It's often easier, and it's always more fun. But the darkness is really important too. Because if we can't see it, especially at those initial stages, we're going to have a really hard time helping people out. So let me give you another example. A client of mine, and this was a really sort of incredible and somewhat heartbreaking experience. I lost my aunt when I was about 10 years old. She was 32 to ovarian cancer. And she left my cousin and her younger brother, Federica and Rodrigo, kind of alone with their dad, and it was a really hard time for our family. And so when this woman came into my clinic telling me she'd been diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer, and it had metastasized to her pelvic bones and to her liver, and she was on narcotics, the first thing I told her was, cancer is a crazy, evil beast, and it's not your fault. And it's a pattern that happens sometimes in a way that we can't understand, for reasons unknown. And we'll do our best, we'll work with plants, and we'll do our best. And so we used a lot of incredible herbs and medicinal mushrooms. One of the things that really struck me is that this pattern of cancer wasn't the only one that was there. She was starting to reach for another cloak, right? She was withdrawing from her husband. She was having a hard time communicating in a meaningful way because she was taking these narcotics for her pain. Very disabling pain. She was not eating as much, and her diversity of diet had changed dramatically. She was eating rice and chicken. That's pretty much it, maybe once a day. And so I was seeing this pattern develop, right? I was like, this is something maybe I can do about. This is something I have seen before. You can call it depression, you can call it whatever you want, but it's not a life-affirming pattern, right? And so using Corydalis and using cannabis, we were able to get control of her pain, and she stopped taking her narcotics over a couple of weeks. And an incredible aromatic blend of, you know, lots of linden, a little bit of lemon balm, a little bit of licorice, became her tea of choice. And she was drinking that tea all the time. And she was taking a little bit of digestive bitters. Her appetite started returning after a few more weeks. And a couple of months later, her eyes were much brighter. She was relating with her husband again the way she always had. She was going outside and walking again. And she was getting back connected with her friends and her community. She had been very active in her community, would go out dancing and would go out to events all the time, and that had all kind of fallen away, but it was coming back. You know, so we were able to get there before she really wrapped herself and hunkered herself down further. And one day, as we're sharing tea in her sunroom, she just asked me, she said, you know, so what do you think the afterlife is? And I was like, oh boy, I don't know. But maybe what I think could happen is that at the moment when we transition, maybe time dilates for us, and, you know, what the people in the room experience as 1 second, kind of like when we're unconscious or when we're dreaming, we experience lifetimes. And all I can wish for when that happens for me is that I go in there feeling happy and loved. And she smiled, and she said, yep, that makes good sense. And over the course of the coming weeks, she invited all of her friends and all of her family into her sunroom to share tea, and she asked them the same question. She said, what do you think the afterlife is? And for some of the people who visited her, this was a gut-wrenching experience. And they were crying and they didn't know what to do. And she held their hands. And she said, you know, it's okay. I just want to know what you think. And so when she passed, and I was at her memorial service, the same thing that happened when I was harvesting that reishi happened. My heart welled up in this incredible way that you don't experience every day. And it was very, very powerful. And the lesson that she taught me about how she handled that experience is one of the most powerful lessons I've experienced from any of my clients. I wish that we could all transition the way she transitioned. And it lifted me up in this incredible way. It's really hard to describe that a process like that should be sad was actually so meaningful and powerful. And I know when she passed, she went to the other world feeling happy and loved. So I'm always grateful for that. So how can we transform destructive patterns? We can't give everybody linden tea. It's not as simple as that. Or is it? I mean, I kind of think it is. As an herbalist, I look at the world around me, I look at nature and I look at how it behaves. And in nature, you guys, I don't know if you agree with this, but you know, Annie and I have talked about this, but I think cities are part of it. And I see the same patterns in cities that I see in forests. They're expressing in really different ways, but the city is a living organism. We just make really cool anthills. But what I've seen consistently in biological systems is that if you want that system to thrive, there's kind of three things that I always go back to. This is something I'll do in clinic, this is something I'll do in community relationships, in organizations I work with. What I find is that first and foremost, the foundational thing is that you have to trust the living system. If you don't trust the living system, forget about it. There's nothing else. If you don't believe that life can sustain itself and correct itself, then I can't convince you of anything else. And I don't know if you can be an herbalist. So we're going to have to agree with that a priori. Does anyone not agree with that? Okay. So if you say that life has the ability to correct itself and to strengthen itself and to breed more life and build more diversity, then the next piece that I've always found is important is to maximize the biodiversity in a living system in any way you possibly can. The more diversity you can inject into a living system, the more resilient it is. We can see this from direct experience. You know, a biodiverse garden versus a monocrop, in terms of resilience, there's no comparison. We can see this in an organic soil that is organic soil amendments versus one that has synthetic soil amendments and no microbes. Its resilience is much greater in the organic soil, over and over again. But actually, believe it or not, mathematicians have looked into this too, and they have found that based on network graph theory, having more nodes and more connections between those nodes makes the system less vulnerable to disruption. So you know, we have a mathematical equation now too, so of course it's real. So the second thing is maximizing biodiversity. So if we can respect and trust the living system and then maximize the inputs, right? And so what is it that we do as herbalists in this time and place when almost 80% of our calories are supplied by like 8 different species? The simple act of giving someone a dandelion root is an incredibly radical increase in biodiversity for that person. Right? It's true. So the last piece that I think is important is when you're working with biological systems or when you're working as an herbalist, I try to focus on support over control. So I always try and say, like, how can I support this person rather than controlling the system? It's very attractive to try and control the system. And I'm not saying that we can't use heroic herbal medicine once in a while, you know, in an acute situation. But generally speaking, that's not what we're really good at. What we're really good at is providing supportive remedies. And I found that generally, if you can support someone's digestion, by giving them a dandelion root and support their nervous system with some nervine teas, if you can give them some berries in a smoothie and maybe some roots that interface with their immune system, you've done like 95% of the work for that person. You've really dramatically increased their biodiversity. You've reconnected them to a really deep well of phytochemistry and put them back in a place where they're starting to dance with the world around them way more than they would have been before. Does that make sense? So it's those three principles I try to come back to. Trust the living system, that it can do, and it has a wisdom, and it knows what it's up to. Increase biodiversity. The exact opposite of insulating yourself, right? Open up, increase biodiversity. And focus on support over control. When we're talking about something like polyphenols, bioflavonoids from hawthorn, right? Everyone knows hawthorn maybe is good for blood pressure. But I'll tell you, the anthocyanidins in hawthorn don't lower your blood pressure. Well, they do, but bear with me. What they actually do by interfacing with the cells that line our blood vessels, the cells in the muscle of the heart, is they set the stage for proper function. Without it, our heart doesn't exactly know what to do. So blood pressure issues fall away almost as a side effect of the real deep medicine, which is reconnecting your endothelial cells and your heart muscle to the chemistry that they long for, to the botanicals that they long for, that they have evolved in the context of consuming. That's really what we're doing, restoring the correct operating environment for the human being by increasing botanical biodiversity in the experience of daily life. And what's cool, right, is that hawthorn doesn't just help with that, it also opens up the heart and makes it easier to fall in love. It makes you feel warmer and more comfortable and more relaxed. All of these things put together are incredible heart medicine. And that's why these polyphenols are important. Not because they're phytochemical constituents that clinical research has shown reduce blood pressure by 10 points systolic and 5 points diastolic when consumed over the course of 6 months. Right? That's not the business. The business is that we're dancing with the hawthorn again. And it's been waiting for us for a long, long time. It's been waiting for us for a long, long time. So that's what I mean by support. Help the system have the inputs that it's used to having. Just like we are gardeners and we provide soil amendments, we need to provide soil amendments for this garden. Because the same things that happen inside also happen outside. As within, so without. The other thing that's really important about what we do is that it's really generally pretty safe if we follow these principles. If we use supportive and nourishing principles, it's really safe. All of you can go out there and do those three things, dandelion, lemon balm, and hawthorn. You will not poison anyone. You will not interact with anyone's prescription medications. And I guarantee that because you're supporting them and increasing their botanical biodiversity, they're going to feel better. It might take a little while, but they're going to feel better. So I'd like to tell you another story. I'm sure some of you have heard this story from me or from other sources, but it's a wonderful story that, for me, really articulates why I'm an herbalist. And it's the story of how Armid brought medicinal plants into the world for us. And the story goes that thousands of years, or in time before time, the Tuatha De Danann, who were the fairy folk, landed on the shores of Ireland. And when they landed on the shores of Ireland, they found this sort of combative race there called the Firbolg. They were really amazing warriors, and they had overrun the entire land. And the Tuatha De Danann wanted to settle there, and the Firbolg would have nothing of it. The Tuatha De Danann were led by Breed, the fairy queen, and her husband, the king consort, was Nuada. And they tried to negotiate with the Firbolg, but they wouldn't have anything of it. And so, of course, war broke out between the Tuatha De Danann and the Firbolg. But Breed had an advantage. Dian Cecht, who was her chief healer and physician, had created a magical well. And if you went into this well and you drank the water or you applied it to your wounds, all your wounds would be healed. The only caveat was that if you had a piece of your body cut off or severed, then the well couldn't fix that. That was gone forever. So if someone could cut off the head of a Tuatha De Danann, that person was gone. Okay? And Dian Cecht was very proud of his work. And with this healing well, the Tuatha De Danann were able to be generally victorious, and they were doing great against the Firbolg. Until one day, Nuada the king found himself with the best warrior of the Firbolg on the field of battle, and he, tripped or something or took a misstep, and the Firbolg warrior was able to slice off his hand. And so Nuada ran back to Breed and was like, "They cut off my hand." She was like, "Well, I'm sorry, but you can't be king anymore, because only a person who is whole has the integrity to be the king of the Tuatha De Danann. So I'm sorry, but you're out." And this threw the entire tribe into disarray. The battles were halted. They thought that maybe they would have to leave. Dayan Kekt said, "Oh, I have a solution. Nuada, I can make a hand for you out of silver that is just as good as the hand you had. You'll be able to grasp your sword. In fact, it will be even better." Sort of like the first instance of the Bionic Man. And so he built the silver hand, and Nuada attached it to his arm, and it worked incredibly well, and it was light, and it was supple, and it worked just like his old hand. So he grasped his sword, and he felt strong, and he went back to Breed, and he said, "I'm ready to go back into battle. We can finish this now." And she looked at him, and she said, "You're still not whole. You can't be our king and our leader." Now, Dayan Kekt had 2 children, a son named Miak and a daughter named Armid. And they had been watching this on the sidelines the whole time, and now that this came down and it was clear that the silver hand was not going to be enough for Breed, their queen, Miak stepped up and said, "Let me and let my sister try to restore our father's hand. I know that supposedly there is no magic that can do that, but let us just try." And in the night, they went back out to the battlefield, and I don't know how they did it, but they found Nuada's actual hand, and they brought it back, and with deep magic that is lost now, they were actually able to restore Nuada's proper hand. And they went back to Breed, and Breed said, "Yep, you're good to go." And the battle resumed. And in the end, the Tuatha De Danann did conquer Ireland, even though the Firbolg had built these incredible, fairy hills like the fairy hills of Noth. But anyway, they took over the old sacred places, and it became the land of the fairies and the Tuatha De Danann from that day forward. But Dayan Kekt, the healer, was not happy to have been upstaged by his kids. And so he brought Miak out, and he said, in front of the entire tribe, he said, "If you're so special, let's see how you can handle this." And he pulled out his sword, and he went right at his son's head. One time, and then Miak healed the cut and restored himself. A second time, and Miak, it took a little bit more effort, but he was able to restore it again. And then Dayan Kekt gave it all he had, and he went right at Miak's head, and he cut it clean off. And of course, there's no coming back from that. The only person who was ever able to restore severed body parts now has his head severed. So that was the end of that story. And when Dayan Kekt realized what he had done, out of his rage and out of his fear, he ran away. But thankfully, Armid, his sister, did not run away. And she sat there with Miak's body for a few days, and misty rains came, and she sat there with him and watched over him. And after a few days, all of these plants started to grow from his body and from around his body. And the legend goes that these plants started to talk to Armid, and she started to talk back to them. And they told her their real names and their medicinal virtues, and how to use them and how to prepare them, and how to channel the deep magic that she and Miak had used to reconnect Nuada's hand through these plants for the benefit of humans. And of course, the legend goes that Armid either still lives or she transmitted this knowledge down generation of wise woman to generation of wise woman, and that the knowledge of herbal medicine came from that original growth of plants out of Miak's body. When Dayan Kekt came back and saw what had happened, he scattered all the plants away, but Armid already knew them all, and she remembered, and she was able to find them out in the wild and teach herbal medicine to everyone else. And I really like this story because Armid's magic, her deep magic, it's not actually gone. It's actually still here. When we talk about a culture that seeks to divide us, and seeks to tell us that we are different and we should be afraid of other, Armid's magic is exactly what we need. It's that reconnection and that restoration that is exactly what we need. And isn't that you know, what's happening to us right now when we're here? I know it's happening to me. When I come here and I listen to the voices raised in song and to the drumming, and I see fire, and I talk to you while we're sharing food or just walking along, it is so restorative. When I listen to people praying and invoking directions, it's so restorative. When I hear people talk about how it's useful and important to think about the place where you are, and that the place where you are breathes through you and informs your life, it's really restorative. Because I don't see that anywhere else. Vermont is a little bit of a bubble, granted. We don't have billboards, it's really nice. But when I drive out of Vermont or fly out of Vermont and like go through an airport, this that we have here is so restorative. This is our culture. Our culture is suffused with Armid's deep magic. The reason we feel this way is because it's actually the plant's culture, too. We just get to share in it, and we get to live in that way. Our consciousness is not our own. When I was having that thought about turning around when I was about to harvest the reishi, and it felt like I was about to give someone a present, it was the reishi and the dough whose consciousness I was sharing. That's why I felt that way. And that's what we feel when we come to these gatherings. The reason we do all the things that we do, and the reason all herbalists across the planet do the things that they do in such similar ways, is because we're sharing consciousness with plants, you guys. It's not us doing it. We just get to be involved. And I think that's so special and important and unique. But there's another thing that I think is really important about Armid's story. And this goes back to one of the things that I was honored and able to be able to sit and speak briefly and listen to the keynote speech at the NOFA Vermont Organic Conference that was presented by Vandana Shiva. And she's incredible. You know, Deb talked about her a little bit last night. And she's really an incredible presence. And she's so powerful, yet understated. I know she's a plant person. And she made this distinction when she was speaking that I think is an echo of Armid's story. She said, there is the mechanistic mind and there's the biological mind. And the mechanistic mind seeks to legislate from the top down. And the biological mind seeks to build from the ground up. The mechanistic mind looks for a blueprint. And anything that doesn't fit into that blueprint is dismissed or cut off or set aside. The biological mind self-assembles. Every piece of a biological system is valued as inherently equal and inherently crucial to the proper functioning of the biological system. The mechanistic mind seeks to control and set parameters and define reality from the top down. The biological mind seeks to support and build and nourish. And she was talking about Monsanto and chemical agriculture in India and what it does to the farmers who are growing crops in India. But it could just as well apply to Nuada's silver hand. And it could just as well apply to the difference between heroic modern tech medicine and the medicine that we practice. Our medicine is born of a biological mind. Conventional medicine, technological medicine, is born of a mechanistic mind. And I'm not here to tell you, you guys, that the mechanistic mind is not okay or it's somehow inherently bad or anything like that. No, there's no moral judgment associated with it. It's just different. And what I am here to tell you is that it can't be the only mind that we use. Yeah. Those are some good noises for the mechanistic mind. But if all that we use is the mechanistic mind, we will end up cutting away more and more and more pieces from the biological web of life. The mechanistic mind is what allows us to spill millions of gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico and turn around and say, hey, that's the cost of doing business. The mechanistic mind allows us to say that the delivery of oil is more important than water. And you know, like, I'm willing to sit down and listen to some arguments about that. I totally am. But I'll tell you, in 50 years, when we're not really using oil anymore, those arguments are going to seem pretty silly. So 50 years is not a very long period of time, I don't think. So the biological mind says something very different. It says, let's get back to the grassroots and let's try and build and nourish, focus on support over control. And I think this is another important piece of what Armid's story tells us. When we isolate ourselves or isolate pieces of the biological web because of fear, all we do is create a pattern of darkness. All we do is we put on that dark cloak. We're seeing it in our culture now. It's been something that we've been doing for a few hundred years, right? And it takes a while for that pattern to evolve into full-blown cultural disease, but we kind of have full-blown cultural disease right now. And so what we need is full-blown cultural medicine. It's true. And that's exactly what we have to offer you guys. It's something that starts simple. It starts in our clinics and in our kitchens, in our families, in our communities, in our gardens. But it can't just stay there. It's not enough for us to rejoice and say like, hey, we're herbalists. We work with the biological mind. We focus on support over control. It's not enough to say that, even though it is incredibly joyous and it's true and it feels really good. And on a case-by-case basis in clinic, we see it change people's lives. But it's going to take more work than that. It really is. Way back in the day, the alchemists were working in a Christian context. 1400s Europe. And they had really deep magic that was based on Egyptian and Persian medicine. A lot of it was based on goddess medicine that predated the Indo-European migration. Very old, crazy ways to work with plants and minerals to make really powerful medicine. But in Christian Europe, they couched their magic and their alchemy in very Christian terms. And they said, you know, the sulfur, the personality of this plant from the astral plane, well, it's like God. And the salt, the soma, the physical flesh of this plant, calcinated down to its salty matter, that's like the Son of God. And the mercury, the vital force that flows between it, that's like the Holy Spirit. So, hey, we're Christian. And you know, it's true, the same kernel of hope does exist, I think, in all religions of the world. Doesn't mean it can't be changed or perverted or destroyed, but it does exist. But what the alchemists did was very smart and very political. They were able to retain their magic in the cultural context by couching it in the language that was in vogue at the time. And so I think that's going to be the hard part for us. But I think that's what we have to do. Because we have to take our message and what we know about herbal medicine to the halls of power at our local level, right? On our school boards and in our communities. We have to take it to the state level, and we have to take it to the national level. And in order to do that, we have to wrap this power and this light that we have, this culture that we have, that resonates with us and is joyous and bright. We have to wrap it in the language of the mechanistic mind. We have to learn about science, and we have to be able to speak that language. I firmly believe this. And I'll tell you, science is beautiful. And the way it looks at the world doesn't have to be actually mechanistic. Science now, with concepts like systems theory and network theory, is actually very rich. and very much connected to the principles that herbalists have known since forever. So it's not as bad as it sounds. But we may also have to take up the mantle of the activist and move out into the world, out of our gardens and out of our fields, maybe into places that are not super duper comfortable, like FDA compliance offices, or congressional hearings, or courtrooms. I'm serious. If we do this, I know that everyone in this room will not get corrupted by it. If we come back to our garden, if we take off our shoes from time to time and reconnect with the soil, if we watch snowy egrets fishing for their dinner as the mist comes up off the lake and the lagoon, we will not get corrupted by this. What we will do is we will insert these green tendrils through the concrete and we will change it. Because we have articulated the principles that systems theory is struggling with better than anything ever has in human history. And we retain it, especially in this country, in a grassroots, deep, unadulterated way. I'm actually really grateful for Abraham Flexner, who in 1920 said that no herbalist could ever go to medical school, because he drove our practice completely underground. If you go anywhere else in the world, Europe, where I'm from in Italy, you buy herbs in the pharmacy in blister packs. New Zealand, where I was lucky enough to go last spring, well, it was fall there, they're struggling with licensure for herbalists because the government is not going to let them prescribe lobelia or comfrey anymore, because you know those are really dangerous plants. But here, we still have a decentralized grassroots movement that is wild and diverse and crazy and weedy and non-standardized. And I'm telling you, standardization is the mechanistic mind at work. Wildness is the biological mind at work. Yes, it's messy, but the end result is always going to be more resilient and more powerful and more whole and more healthy. Just like Nuada with his true hand, compared to Nuada with the silver hand. So if we can step up and out and bring our message cloaked and wrapped in the trappings of the mechanistic mind, not really embracing it, but showing that we can speak it and we can walk it and we can play that game, then slowly we will show people that there is a way to do business differently. There is a way to live in this world differently. And it is a way that we all know and we experience on a daily basis, but most people don't get to. And my big hope is that as people begin to see this, they're like, wow, that company is really not doing business as usual. Wow, these guys are like giving herbs away to people who really need them. Wow, okay. That it will reawaken that desire for meaning, the lack of which makes people so afraid because they're so wounded. People behave like wounded animals. And then they hide and they wrap themselves in that cloak, right? They're doing it because they're afraid, and they're afraid because what they had when they were little kids and they were playing in the garden, they don't know how to get back to it. And if there's anything we know how to do, if you listen to what Deb was saying last night, well, we can help with that, right? We can help with that. And we may have to start talking about, bioflavonoids and their effect on systolic pressure. But then we can come back to say, like, and you know what? These weird things happen. And you, say I love you more. And I will tell you, physicians get this. They're starting to get this more and more. 20 years ago when I was starting this work, connecting with physicians in oncology and in cardiovascular disease, it was hard to do this work. But now, medical student graduates who come into practice, they're like, oh yeah, that's going to really increase their overall phytonutrient density. And I think that's a good thing. I'm like, yes, it is a good thing. Yes, it is. So I get to travel to this incredible place in East Africa every spring. We're going to leave on the 20th of April and stay for about a month. I get to bring amazing herbalists with me who help, and anyway, it's just an incredible experience. Every time I'm there, I make it a point to reconnect with this this character, this amazing guy. His name is Sangao Sweke, and he is a local traditional healer of the Maasai community, and he is a force. He has this incredible infectious laugh and smile. He sees lines of people who walk up to his boma, to his enclosure, to get these crazy decoctions made under the shadow of the loisugi tree, and go to him to be healed and to be restored. We sit and we drink tea, and through an interpreter, or sometimes two interpreters who are going, Maasai to Swahili, Swahili to English, we talk about things. And some people think that Sangao is a witch doctor, and some people say that he talks to Satan. I'm serious. And when we're sitting there and drinking tea and talking through an interpreter, I say, so when you go out there in the woods, what do you do? Do you talk to the trees? And he says, well, there's only one God, but there's all these spirits that each tree has, and they talk to you. And Sangao trusts me because I'm American, and I speak plant language. We share the same experiences. The same experience I had with Reishi, he's had out in the forest. The same experience I had with my client, he's had with his. So we resonate in that way. But the hospital still thinks he talks to Satan. The source of this disconnect, the source of this schism, is the conflict between the mechanistic and the biological mind. They have a hard time understanding what he's up to because they're working from a very different place. Now, I'm lucky, because I'm a white American male, that I can go into the hospital, and when I tell them, plants are actually useful, they listen to me. They wouldn't listen to Sangao, but they would listen to me. And so I tell them, yes, plants are useful. And we've been able to shift wound care at that hospital from antibiotic creams and silver cream for burns to things like usnea powder and honey and prickly pear puree for burns, which is actually pretty amazing for burns. We've been able to make a comprehensive handout because now hospital staff is curious about this stuff because they see it works. So we made a comprehensive handout that has, over 40 botanical species, and it's 3 different languages, and it has pictures, and it talks about what the Maasai are using these plants for. So when people come into the hospital and they're talking about stuff that they're taking, the hospital staff has a little bit better of a sense of what they're up to. And little by little, the divide between the biological and the mechanistic mind begins to narrow. And my hope is that, I can leave and not be involved anymore, and I think that'll happen pretty soon. But Sangao isn't an agent of Satan anymore. They start to understand a little bit more what he's up to. So this is the kind of stuff that I think, we're able to do in an under-resourced setting like East Africa, but holy cow, it's the stuff we need to do here. It's the stuff we need to do here. Now, I'm not saying that East African Tanzania mainstream culture is, all love and roses, but they are still more connected to the land than most of the people in this country are. And if we can heal that schism and that rift between the mechanistic and the biologic mind, which we can do as herbalists, then I think we can go a really long way to healing our culture and providing a solid foundation that relies on those principles, right? So how do I know that I'm interfacing with a biological system? How do you know that you're there and interfacing with a biological system? I'll tell you this, it's super simple. If you're working with a mechanistic mind, you're going to feel it up here. If you're interfacing with a biological system, you're going to feel it here. You're going to feel it in your heart. Your heart will fill, your heart will well up. It's as simple as that. When you're making a connection to a living, breathing ecology, you feel it in your heart. Okay? And so this is something we can use on a daily basis when we're working in clinic, when we're connecting with physicians, when we're doing any kind of herbal work and herbal outreach in our community. Do we feel it in our heart? Are we building a biologic system? Because if we feel it there, then yes, we're interfacing with life. If we don't feel it there, we're using the mechanistic mind. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But like when I wild harvest, the mechanistic mind is there all the time. You know, it's like, yeah, I know that this skull cap doesn't really look like a super healthy stand out here in the woods, but you do need some for tincture. That's mechanistic mind. Or, well, I know that you really want to see what's around that bend, but you got to get back to your car if you're going to make it home for this appointment. That's mechanistic mind. But when you say, like, I am going to explore what's around that bend, you're like, to hell with the appointment. And you feel it in here. It's because you're sharing consciousness with the forest and with that stone that you're about to walk around and see the wild American ginseng. It's talking to you, you're sharing consciousness with it, and when you share consciousness with the living biologic system, you feel it in your heart. And if we can interface with the crazy world around us in a heart-centered way, feeling with our heart and moving forward, you know, go to Kathleen's workshop tomorrow and practice this business and take it out into your communities. If we can do that, there is no limit to the healing we can do. There is no limit to the connections we can make in this culture. And it is going to be the next turn of the human spiral. It's going to be the evolution in the 21st century. It is the new modern. Heart-centered connection, interface with biologic systems, focusing on support over control based on trust in those living systems rather than top-down legislation mechanistic mind. We can do this. We can do this. So, I want to leave you beautiful people, you sources of light, you stardust and lights yourselves with this last story, okay? And then I will be quiet. It's an old fable, you probably have heard it before, but it is a good one. The sun and the wind were up in the sky. They're arguing all the time about who is stronger. And the sun says, well, I can see everything and cast my light upon all things. And the wind says, well, I can blow down mountains. And the sun says, well, I can heat the oceans and water mist rises and forms clouds. And the wind says, well, I can whip up waves on those oceans, the likes of which you've never seen, and I can push those clouds into storms that will destroy any forest. And on they go, stuck in the sky together, the wind and the sun. Until one day, sick and tired of arguing, they decide to settle it once and for all. And the wind, feeling very self-assured, says to the sun, you see that traveler down there? It was kind of a cool day. There's that traveler down there. And the wind says, see that traveler? Will you agree with me that whoever can get that cloak off of that traveler is the stronger one? And the sun said, okay, let's do this thing. And the wind's like, I'm going first. The sun's like, okay. And so the wind starts, you know, a little breeze kicks up, the little leaves around the traveler's feet begin to rustle a little bit, and then the wind picks up and blows stronger and stronger and stronger until there's this gale pushing against this traveler. You know, have you ever stood on a mountaintop and the wind is so strong that you really you're like leaning about at a 45-degree angle and the wind is holding you up? It was stronger than that. Wind kept pushing and pushing and pushing, harder and harder and harder and harder. But wouldn't you know that the harder the wind pushed, the tighter that traveler wrapped that cloak around himself. Eventually, exhausted and breathless, the wind gives up. And it's like, fine, sun, it's your turn. And the sun just opens up and shines, and the air around the traveler warms up. And he stops and he looks around and he's like, wow. He connects with the trees on the side of the trail, and the mountains in the distance, the sun in the sky. He feels the warm air and he says, it's a beautiful day. And he takes off his cloak. Thank you.